Next up is Alice's death. Now, in the book, the characters leave Gayton Academy and then they make their way to Kent Pond because that's where Clay's son Johnny and his wife Sophia stay. Along the way, they get harassed by Gunnar and Harold, these two young men driving around in a Cadillac. They end up killing Alice with a chunk of cinder block, and the others decide to let Alice die a peaceful death before moving on. And at one point before her death, the Raggedy Man uses her to communicate to them. Now, in the movie, things play out a little bit differently. They end up going to a roadside bar and they find a group of survivors, but the following morning, all the survivors have become infected by the pulse, and this is where the characters discover that once they've become zombies, they can simply transmit the pulse through their mouths. And one of them ends up killing Alice with a simple blow to the head. So her death is kind of the same, but in different circumstances. And when she dies, she just dies. The Raggedy Man doesn't try to communicate through her. Now, if you've read the book, you know that Clay and his wife Sophia were separated because he was so passionate about becoming a graphic novel artist that it put a strain on their marriage. Now, the same thing applies to the movie, but in a conversation that he has with Alice at the roadside bar, just hours before the survivors became zombies, he does admit to, on one occasion, while being separated from Sophia, engaging in a fling with another woman. But it was one time. This was never brought up in the book. Next up, the aftermath of Alice's death. After she dies, they decide to go straight to Ken Pond. In the movie, they decide to stay over at an abandoned drive-in theater, and that's where they all have the same dream of the Raggedy Man. So Clay, Tom, and Jordan arrive at Ken Pond. Once there, Clay doesn't find Sophia or Johnny, but he finds a note from Johnny saying that they're at the town hall. So they make their way to the town hall, and they find another note revealing that Sophia became one of them, and Johnny is now at Cashwalk. All of this happens before they encounter Ray, Denise, and Dan, the flock killers. And all of this happens in the book. Meanwhile, in the movie, they encounter the flock killers first, and then they go to Ken Pond. And when they arrive at Ken Pond, Clay finds a notice from Johnny about Sophia becoming one of them and that he's a Cashwalk in the form of letter magnets on a fridge. Then there's the actual flock killers. In the book, there's Ray, Dan, and Denise. Denise is pregnant, as she is in the movie. But in the movie, there's just Ray and Denise is pregnant with Ray's child, meaning they're together. Denise has a brother who is now a zombie, and they keep him tied up because, as I mentioned earlier, the zombies act as a hive mind, and if any of the flocks are nearby, then he will begin to shake and tremble and so on. But not too long after we're introduced to Ray and Denise, the zombie begins to speak, and he sounds a lot like Johnny. He has a beanbag over his head, and Clay is tempted to take it off. Tom begs him not to, because he doesn't believe that that's Johnny under there. Nonetheless, Clay does so, and it is Denise's brother, but he's using bits and pieces of the phone call that Clay and Johnny had at the beginning of the movie to try and trick him. Tom ends up having no choice but to kill the zombie, and everybody has to flee the area before the flock arrives because they'll sense that the zombie was shot. This didn't happen in the book. They actually fled the area for another reason. Now, by the end of Act 5, which is Ken Pond, Clay and the others decide to go their separate ways so that he can find Johnny in Cashwalk. And then in Act 6, phone bingo, he stays in a cottage and has more dreams about the Raggedy Man, and this time they include Johnny. And he even encounters 2 zombies engaging in a brutal fight, and they don't even notice him. But by the end of it, he and the others eventually reunite. In the movie, however, the entire 6th act is completely removed, and after Tom ends up killing Denise's brother, they decide to leave the area, and then they go straight to Ken Pond. So, Ray's death plays out differently in the movie compared to the book, but I think the book did it much better. He gives Clay a cell phone and a note, which gives him instructions. Now you're probably wondering, why does he write down these instructions? Why can't he just tell Clay what he wants to tell him? Well, the problem with that is, if he tells Clay what he wants to tell him, the zombies will be able to read his mind. And to make sure that they never find out about any of this, he basically shoots himself in the head with a gun. But in the movie, for some reason, I get that he's an expert in explosives, just like he is in the book. He can literally be seen with a suicide vest, which he then uses to blow himself up. Clay survives the explosion, but it results in some really shoddy CGI work. In the book, Clay then demands that everybody leaves their weapons behind so that on the road to Cashwalk, they don't become tempted to do what Ray did. And even though Clay had separated from them earlier, it's very clear that they didn't reunite by coincidence, but because the Raggedy Man is manipulating them into going to Cashwalk together so that he can turn all of them into zombies. But in the movie, they simply head for Ken Pond after Tom kills Denise's brother. In case you don't know what happens in the 8th act, they come across the Northern Counties Expo while on the way to Cashwalk, and there they encounter the Raggedy Man face to face. He briefly joins them for a ride in the school bus they rode in on. He doesn't do anything to harm them, but this was the weirdest part of the book for me. And then he gets off, like everyone else, and does nothing afterwards. The Northern Counties Expo is actually where most of the zombies come to hang out and do zombie stuff, I guess. Clay reads the instructions that Ray left for him, and this is important because the phone is actually a detonator for a couple of explosives that Ray himself put in the back of the school bus. And all Clay has to do is dial the number on the page, and the bombs will go off. And the phone is also connected to the cell phone tower responsible for the pulse. So if he dials the same number, he can also corrupt its signal, which could potentially reset all of the zombies' brains. But in the movie, the explosives will come in handy for another purpose right at the very end. He even begins planning out his next graphic novel, and it's called Cell. Yeah, just like the book, Cell. And then the group hatches a plan. Just like at Gaten Academy, the zombies are all asleep at night, but this time they're transmitting the song of Maria, and the group sends Jordan out to drive the school bus with the explosives to a good enough location in order to blow it up. Jordan gets out of the bus and is far enough for Clay to blow it up with the phone. And not only did he blow up the bus in the process, but he also corrupted the pulse's signal, which then lets out a new pulse and has a dire effect on the zombies. The bomb didn't only wipe out the zombies in the expo, but it also took out the Raggedy Man. And unfortunately, none of this happens in the movie. In the movie, the events that happen in the 8th act of the book, aka Cashwalk, are practically cut out entirely. Instead, after Ray kills himself, they go to Ken Pond, and then, once that's out the way, Clay separates from everybody else to go and find Johnny. Now, I mentioned earlier that Sophia ended up becoming one of the zombies. In the book, Clay has a brief encounter with her at the Northern Counties Expo, but he doesn't interact with her at all and he just lets her be. In the movie, while at Ken Pond, he suspects that someone is in Sophia's house, and then a zombie that resembles the Raggedy Man attacks him, but then he discovers that it's Sophia. It was too late for her anyway. Now, this is a very minor thing, but I chose to add it in because it's something I found at the last minute. There was an ice cream truck at the beginning of the book where Clay went to get some ice cream for Johnny. Well, that doesn't happen at the beginning of the movie. Instead, Ray happened to have an ice cream truck, and after he dies, the group ends up taking the truck. And when Clay decides to go by himself to Cashwalk, he decides to take the truck. That's where Ray put all the explosives. On the way to Cashwalk, Clay begins to notice that the zombies are becoming more and more intelligent and less vicious. While in Cashwalk, he actually finds Johnny, but unfortunately Johnny is also a zombie. But thankfully, he more than likely became a zombie during the second pulse because he's not as vicious as the ones from earlier on in the book. Clay takes care of him while staying in an abandoned house, and then decides to further corrupt the pulse's signal by dialing the number that Ray gave him, and then places the phone near Johnny's ear. And then the book just ends there. What? What the fuck? Like, that's it. No resolution. It's open to interpretation, I guess. In the movie, Ray made it abundantly clear that Cashwalk is a trap, and if he does find himself in any trouble, specifically with the Raggedy Man, then the explosives in the ice cream truck should come in handy. When he arrives at Cashwalk, he finds a communications tower. It's unclear as to whether or not this is the cell phone tower that's responsible for the pulse, just like in the book, or if it's a different tower. And he can hear a thundering noise, but it's actually a huge circle of zombies that are doing nothing. They're walking around in a circle. So he makes his way there, and they don't do anything to harm him at all. And there he encounters the Raggedy Man. He knocks him over with the ice cream truck, and then shoots at him with a shotgun a couple of times. He encounters Johnny and notices that he isn't a-okay. Just like in the book, he's more than likely a zombie. But then all the zombies start making a loud noise, and then it's revealed that the Raggedy Man is still alive. And then Johnny starts making the noise, and it's more than likely that they are transmitting the pulse through their mouths. And then Clay sets off the explosion with his cell phone, which means he and Johnny may end up dying, but if they die together. This does result, unfortunately, in a really crappy CGI explosion with some really noticeable green screen work. Shortly after the really awful CGI explosion, Clay and Johnny are revealed to be alive.
Hey yo, what the fuck?
They're on their way to meet up with Tom, Jordan, and Denise, and they even find spray painted initials on a tree. This is something that happened in the book because just before Clay goes off to find Johnny, the group finds a truck full of spray cans, and they use it to spray paint their initials on buildings, bridges, etc. so that if Clay wants to find them, all he has to do is follow the initials. And in the book, TDJ stood for Tom, Denise, Dan, and Jordan, whereas in the movie, it simply stood for Tom, Denise, and Jordan. But the one thing that ruins the ending for me is the revelation that Clay actually failed.
What? Hey yo, what the fuck? What the fuck?
Yes, the cell phone tower is still intact, and now Clay is a zombie, and he is walking in the circle with all the others. Some people may have been confused by this ending. Well, what happened was, when all the zombies, including Johnny and the Raggedy Man, were sending out the pulse through their mouths, Clay had pretty much become infected, and everything that happened afterwards was all in his head, and I guess the same applies to all the other zombies. They think that they're free, but they're not. It's an interesting twist ending, but for me, I kinda wanted a happier ending. Given how the book ended, I kinda wanted the movie to go all out and just give the characters the closure they deserve, but we didn't get it. And the weirdest thing about the ending is the fact that they chose to use the song You'll Never Walk Alone by Jerry and the Pacemakers. You know, the Liverpool anthem. Rest in peace, Jerry. So yeah, those were all the differences between the Stephen King book Cell and its film adaptation. And between both of these, the book is much better, and the movie is bad. Next time, I'm gonna begin my Cannibal Corpse retrospective with their debut album, Eaten Back to Life, because their upcoming 15th album is gonna be released in April. So thank you all for watching. Please be sure to like the video, share it and subscribe, and hit the notification icon. Be safe during this time, and I'll see you soon.